and welcome back to the garage with Bonesaw. As you've probably guessed, today we are looking at the TOG, the British Tier 6 Premium Heavy Tank. Now, I'm not entirely sure if a lot needs to be said about the TOG, especially seeing as there's been plenty said about it already. It's a very, very good Tier 6 Premium Heavy Tank. It's well worth the money you pay for it, and it's a lot of fun. It's also noticeably huge. The TOG is really, really, really big. And there's a good number of reasons for that. Now, TOG stands for the Old Gang, and it was developed by a bunch of guys who worked for the British Army, and they had previously been members of the Tank Design Board in World War One, and they developed most of the British tanks, such as the Whippet light tank and the Mark IV through to, well, technically 10, because the Americans built licensed copies under the name of Mark X Liberty, but the British only really went up to Mark VIII. They built the land ship Mark tanks, the large rhombus shapes that we're all familiar with from World War One, and they designed the TOG much in the similar fashion they designed World War One era tanks. They pretty much assumed that World War Two was going to be the same as World War One. It was going to be trench fighting. You need to be able to cross trenches, things like that. And so that's what the TOG was designed in mind. And it was radically different from any other British tank developed at the time. You see things like the Churchill or the Valentine or the Matilda, and they're reasonably sensible tanks. They're infantry tanks. They're designed to accompany the infantry. Then you've got things like the Crusader and the Cromwell. They're your cruiser tanks. They're designed to outflank the enemy. Pretty similar stuff to what's going on with the rest of the world. And the TOG just seems like a moment of lunacy. It's absolutely, completely and utterly different from anything else. As you can see, it has these two large hatches on the side. They offer crew access, but it was also proposed that because the interior was so large on this tank that it could be used to transport men across the field in order to allow them to capture enemy trenches. The original version of the TOG 1, which was never built, it was just blueprints, didn't actually have a turret. It had sponson mounted guns, so guns mounted on the sides like the original Mark IV and Mark V tanks of World War I fame. The TOG 2 added the turret with a 17-pounder gun. Originally it was going to be a 77mm, but then it was upgraded to a 17-pounder in the designs. Now, there is one thing that I do question in the representation of the TOG in World of Tanks, and that is, it says TOG 2 with an asterisk at the end. Now, in British tank naming nomenclature, an asterisk means that it is a variant. It means it's a production variant. There's something has been changed to it. So, for instance, say we have a Churchill with a howitzer or something like that in place of the standard gun, it would say Churchill Mark 7 asterisk, and that's because it is mounting a different gun to what the standard production variant is. And I haven't been able to puzzle out what is different about this TOG, why it has the asterisk. It might have just been something that they picked up. It might be because it has the 17-pounder. I honestly don't know. But, all in all, it doesn't really matter. The TOG never really actually saw combat. They built one prototype of it, and by the time it was ready, it was pretty late in the war, and things had moved on. It was absolutely, completely and utterly not needed. Its armor was no longer effective. Events had moved on, and it was never used. The real TOG now resides at Bovington Tank Museum, where it is a popular favourite, and most people just marvel at how bloody huge it is. Anyway, let's get on with the in-game stats, shall we? Alright, so the TOG has a 600 horsepower engine for an 81-ton tank. So it's not going to go anywhere very fast. Its top speed list is about 14 kilometers an hour. It goes somewhere close to 18, but even then, it's not particularly fast. It is speed limited. You can go no faster than 18 kilometers an hour. You see a lot of people pushing TOGs into battle. Like, you'll see lighter tanks like Shermans, Panzer IVs, things like that, drive up behind you when you're in the TOG and try to push you. For those of you who do this, thank you very much for trying to push the TOG. We appreciate the sentiment, but don't bother. The TOG can go no faster than 18 kilometers an hour, no matter how hard you try to push it. We've had conga lines behind our TOGs of tanks trying to push us faster, and it does nothing. It just slows you down. So, thank you for the help, but ultimately don't bother. Secondly, is that the TOG doesn't have very much armor. It only has about 76 mils of armor. It is sloped, but that's not going to do much. I mean, the KV-1 has about 76 mils of armor, and it has much better sloping than you do, so, you know, don't expect to bounce much, but you do have 1400 hit points at tier 6. That's as much as a Tiger, and a Tiger is at tier 7. Well, Tiger has about 500 more, but that's irrelevant. No, sorry, 50 more. But ultimately, that's irrelevant. You have 1400 hit points. That's a substantial amount, and that really makes up for your lack of armor. You can really afford to take some shots. Granted, you don't want to be facing too much concentrated firepower, as you can lose that health quite quickly. Angling yourself will allow you to survive for longer, though. You can bounce some shots off this front plate if you do angle yourself. Generally speaking, you don't want people shooting you in the side. It is just these big slabs. They are 76mm thick, so they can bounce some lower caliber guns, but generally speaking, you have these weak points like this hatch here, so you don't want to be shot there. The rear of this tank is interesting. The rear of the tank is very, very heavily sloped, heading down to the final drives in the rear. The engine's located about here-ish in the tank. It's actually quite a large engine. But yeah, it has quite a heavy slope on the rear of the tank. It is only 50mm thick, but I have heard people propose that for increased durability, you can drive the TOG in reverse and gain the benefits of sloped armor by using this rearward plate. I haven't attempted it, it slows you down to a crippling rate, and the TOG is slow enough as it is, so I don't really think it's worth the bother. Trying to get hull down in the TOG is a good idea. You do have 114mm of armor on the front of your turret, which means you can be somewhat durable. You do, however, have the weak points of an inner mantlet, so they will aim for that hole there around the gun, as well as on the optics and the front section of the hull on around the machine guns and around the driver's hatch. A repair kit for a TOG is not absolutely essential at tier 6. However, you can take one if you want. You will tend to lose your tracks. People go for the tracks on this thing like there's no tomorrow to try and stop you from maneuvering, but it doesn't really matter. An immobile TOG is pretty much the same as a mobile one, so it doesn't really matter. You just got to take into account that you're not getting overwhelmed. The gun on the TOG is really it's one of its big selling points. It's a very, very good gun. It's a quick-firing 17-pounder Mark 7. And while it says it's mounted only on the TOG, that's the thing with premium tanks. Premium tanks, their gun might be exactly identical to something else. It'll just say that it's only available for this tank. 12 rounds per min, which is a pretty good rate of fire. 171mm penetration. That'll go through pretty much anything at your tier. Even tier 7 tanks. 150 average damage, pretty good. 0.36 accuracy at 100 meters, great. 2.3 aim time, not great but not bad. So as you can see, the 17-pounder is overall a very effective gun, especially considering the fact that the TOG's slow speed means that you generally won't have much dispersion when firing on the move. So you really can, just slowly advance towards the enemy battleship style and just keep chugging away with that gun. It is the same gun as on the AT-15A, as you can see, Mark 7. Quick-firing 17-pounder, and you will find it on plenty of other tanks. You'll find it on the Black Prince, a number of the tank destroyers. It's a pretty common gun, it's very effective, but it is a tier 7 gun at tier 6. Now, another thing that needs to be taken into consideration as well with the TOG is artillery. You do need to be substantially aware of enemy artillery because you are a large target. I know some would recommend a super heavy spall liner for this tank because it does have the weight to get it. I personally am not invested in one yet, simply due to cost and also because I'm not entirely sure about its value. Previously the spall liners were all identical and that was the reason why I hadn't really invested in one. And it is only plus 50% armor protection from explosions, which isn't a tremendous amount considering you have low armor. On a Churchill, a spall liner is a great investment because a Churchill already has heavy armor. Its only issue is the fact that high explosive rounds just really like to jack up a Churchill. I've seen people have some good success with spall liners on the TOG, so I might try it in the future. Enhanced gun laying drive can be a good choice for this tank due to the increased aim time. Lets you just get off those rounds even faster. Gun rammer also can be a good choice. It's not 100% necessary, as you already do have a pretty good rate of fire. Telescope and coated optics aren't really worth it. Generally speaking, in the TOG you don't stop. It's the same with camouflage net. You don't stop, because if you stop you'll never get to the fight. The wet ammo rack. This one's also a bit of a contested one. The TOG doesn't get ammo racked that frequently, but it does happen. And considering your thin armor, it could be a valuable investment in order to avoid losing those important rate of fire, which really is the main trait of your tank. Enhanced vertical coil springs, possibly. The main reason why you pick this one generally would be for increased durability on the suspension. You wouldn't really need the load capacity because you already have a good free 4 tons of load capacity. It doesn't really matter. CO2 in the tanks, once again, not really necessary. I've never had my TOG get set on fire. It only has, I believe, a 20% chance of engine fire. I'll just check that. No, 15% chance, so it's even better than most German vehicles, so it won't. Chances of fire are low. Toolbox can be a good investment to increase repair speed, and vents, if you really want to get the most out of your TOG, yep, they're a great choice as well. In terms of consumables and such, I don't run any consumables on my TOG. I generally find that I don't really need a repair kit, and in most of the situations where I do, it's a case where I'm going to die anyway. Med kit is kind of the same. Generally finding I don't really use them very often. I don't really need to recover my crewmen. They generally don't take any damage. Putting in T, if you want to have increased crew skill, you don't really need it unless you're doing an all TOG company battle or something like that. Automatic fire extinguisher and regular fire extinguisher, once again, not really needed. Doesn't really catch on fire that often. And aside from that, I don't believe this tank can take any of the high octane fuel, anything like that. So, there's no real point in consumables unless you really feel that you really need that increased crew skill or the surety of having a repair kit. Now, more importantly, let's get on to some of the fun things you can do with the TOG. First of all is, of course, the classic TOG platoon. I do these with Fagerline quite frequently. He also owns a TOG, and having 2 TOGs together is a very formidable formation. Having 3 TOGs is even better, because with 2 TOGs you have about 2,800 hit points combined, which is quite a durable proposition, and your guns can do substantial amount of damage in return. Which makes you a great base of fire for the rest of your team, and if your team can really rally around you, that will make it even more effective. I remember when the TOG first came out, it was received with something of a mixed welcome. A lot of people didn't like it because they complained about its low armor and the fact that it was very slow, and a lot of people, including myself, didn't have much success with it. And that wasn't because the TOG was bad, it was mainly just because your team didn't really know how to play alongside you. More often than not, you'd find your team race off into the fight and leave you chugging along behind, and by the time you got into the fight, everyone else was dead, leaving just you. You'd go down swinging, perhaps take 1 or 2 tanks with you, and then everyone would promptly complain that the TOG was crap. And that's just patently not true. The TOG is really, really good, so long as your team form around you and use you as the team battering ram, I guess you could say, really to just crush through the enemy and absorb that fire. The TOG can also be excellent in the defensive role. Very good rate of fire on that gun can really whittle down enemies fast to allow allies to take them down quickly. And in positions such as choke points on the flanks on places like Lakeville, the bridges on Erlenberg, some of the streets in Himmelsdorf and Ensk, the TOG can be really used tactically if you're on low health by turning sideways and using that length to block off narrow choke points, because once TOG is dead, virtually nothing can push it. And you can really use that. Generally speaking, you don't want to die in a TOG, but if needs must, you can die and use the bulk of your tank to block off the enemy. And I've secured victory for my team a number of times by doing this, blocking off bridges and things near the cap on Erlenberg and in assault battles to prevent the enemy from crossing to the cap, things like that. And generally, the enemy team will hate you for it. They will, generally speaking, abuse you for it, but you don't have to care. You're in a TOG. When you're in a TOG, you're king of the battlefield. No one gives you crap. You laugh at them and drive onwards in your TOG, laughing until the sun sets. And for what you get in the TOG, it is relatively cheap. It is much cheaper than many of the Tier 8 heavy tank premiums. And it is a lot of fun. It is also very effective in combat, as I'll show you in the replays. And I will highly recommend getting a TOG. Even if, like me, you don't use it for training purposes or for farming experience or for anything, you just use it for fun, get one. You will not regret having a TOG, and having a TOG on your team is always a massive advantage, so long as your team plays along with the TOG and uses it correctly. So here we are on Sacred Valley with the British Tier 6 heavy tank, the TOG. As you can see, I've got the very distinctive snow camouflage scheme, as does Oberst Fegelein, our twin white whales of destruction. So we're going to be moving up along the B line, along the hills. Now normally that's not a great idea for a TOG. The TOG moves pretty slow as is, and hills only make things worse. However, this is an encounter battle, and if we were to head down to the cap, we would be very much at risk of receiving fire from two positions. As you can see there, we've already spotted a medium from the first position. The second position would be enemies camped out along the H and J9 sectors up near the temple. And that's a problem with the TOG. The TOG does have a lot of health. Combined, myself and Fegelein have roughly 2,800 health, which is nothing to be sniffed at, but with the TOG, generally, you don't want to be taking too much fire. You don't really have much armor, so you can't resist that damage as much. You are very much reliant on your health to keep you alive. So taking fire from multiple positions is not generally a good idea. Quick shoulder check there, but we couldn't get any shots on those medium tanks. So we're going to continue moving up. Actually, I've just noticed that in the replay file, for some reason, it doesn't animate the tracks on Fegelein's TOG. As you can see, it only animates them from time to time. You'll notice in a minute he'll turn again and it'll stay still, which, you know, it's one of those things that can happen with the replay files because they aren't a direct recording. They are just a compilation of coordinates and other data that is then replayed through the game engine. So we've got a shot on this M4 Sherman here. He's just been tracked, so I'll finish him off for the first kill in the TOG. Still proceeding along the B line. Now, we're currently losing. We've got 4 tanks down, and our deployment at the cap doesn't seem very good. However, we do have a very nice heavy tank push coming up along here. 2 TOGs and a KV-1S, which is a strong amount of firepower. The TOG has a very good gun. Not as devastating per shot as the 122mm on the KV-1S, but it has very good penetration, very good accuracy, aim time and rate of fire, which makes for some very effective damage per minute. In fights with other heavy tanks, the TOG can be a very strong opponent, as its health allows it to absorb a lot of enemy damage, and that gun can put out a startling amount of damage in return. So we've encountered the enemy push, and we're just going to move down here to engage. Our KV-1S has taken a hit, but we've left a T1 heavy on about 1%, and Fegelein is moving to engage the other T1. We also have a Su-85 up to our left. Alright, Fegelein's taking some hits, but you can see he's still on a fair amount of health, and he's slowly chopping that T1 heavy into very low health. And we're going to finish him off with a synchronized shot. Take a first hit from the Su-85, and unfortunately my gun is not aimed in time to get a return hit, but our Su-5 artillery piece, Su-8 will destroy him in return. Alright, now I'm taking some shots from the right, so we know that at best that Panzer IV is still down there. There may also be other tanks down in the village area located along the E line. So instead of going with the KV-1S, Fagerland and myself decided to circle around through the village to prevent our boys on the cap and our KV-1S from getting encircled or counter-pushed from enemies in the town. There's currently a light tank pushing on the cap, and unfortunately I do not have a shot at him. But we do encounter a very low health T1 Heavy, so I'll take him out for a quick kill and proceed to move down the village. We have spotted the enemy artillery, however I do not have a shot on that, and the KV-1S is going to pick up that for a nice kill there, and that's secured the game for us substantially, as it means our cap push is no longer vulnerable to artillery fire. So linking up the KV-1S down through the town here, we're just going to clear out that Panzer IV, put some good shots into him, and allow the KV-1S to finish him off. So the KV-1S will finish that Panzer IV off with a single shot, and myself and Fagerland will proceed to link up and clear out the enemies up to the temple. So I'm taking a hit from KV-1. He must be using the 122mm howitzer. Put a solid hit into that M7 medium right there, and he bounced off me. I'm not sure if he's using the 75mm gun or the much weaker 37mm or the 6-pounder. Generally speaking, the TOG doesn't bounce shots, but from the right angles it does have a slope on its front armour as well as its rear armour. I have had people argue that the TOG is actually superior when driven in reverse because it has equal front and rear armour, however the rear armour is much greater sloped. Alright, getting a shot in on this Stug as it traverses. Solid 150 damage hit there. He's now moved into cover, so I'm going to switch to this KV-1. I take a hit there, but it's nothing I can't absorb on my health. It is important to keep track of your health as a TOG, but I'm still on 900. Very effective number. I'll take another hit into that Stug, track him around to finish him off. The KV-1 missed his shot, but I figured it's best to move on. There may be more KVs up there, and more of them may be equipped with the howitzer. The howitzer is quite a threat to a TOG. The TOG does not have substantial armour, so it can still penetrate you and deal increased damage. Put another good hit into the KV, and take a hit that takes out my driver. I'm still on a decent amount of health, roughly 50%. However, with a missing driver, the TOG is very, very slow. And pursuing that KV now is pretty much not an option. I will attempt to put some shots into him, however, those subsequent shots missed. And I don't really have any shots on the enemies remaining. So I've decided that even with my dead driver, it's best to proceed up the hill. Unfortunately, that Stug was to be my last kill for the game, as our allies very swiftly clear out the enemies remaining in the temple. So as you can see, the TOG is a very, very effective heavy tank, and is more than capable of constituting an impressive force on any flank of the battlefield.